This is Maurice and Cain and his wife and first name
Nadine.
Nadine. That's right. I almost forgot. You'll find that I have many senior moments here, so just ignore me. And they're going to tell us about their early life in this area. And just begin anywhere you'd like to, when you came to this area and why you came, and if you had children when you came, or you had your family here, or you just begin.
Well, she's better talker than I am, so you might better let, you know.
No, he's the best talker.
Well, I know my husband said you had such a good memory.
Well, you know, of course, I assume unless we get it all, you know, messed up with a ailment of some type, well, most people have a pretty good memory. A lot of us remember things that, you know, are really enjoyable to be able to remember, and then some things you just sort of wish would go away, but they don't.
Some things you'd like to forget.
Oh, yeah, but, you know, I don't know about that. Part of life, it doesn't really matter, but you got to take the good and the bad
That's right.
along with it. Well, I don't know now. Frankly, I didn't plan on getting into telling no story because I just don't get, you know, I just don't really care about it. See, I got involved in that with a person at this UNC at Lubbock. They wanted to talk to me about aging and medical problems of
And that's
aging
not
and
what
so
Jan's
forth.
wanting to talk about.
And so, you see, we had this long conversation, and I just responded, which that worked pretty good, but it just kept going and on and on and on. And I finally ran out of responses.
Ran out of juice.
So, but anyway, then see later, then this person came back again, and I just didn't want to get involved with it again because, see, I don't like to get tied down. See, what I had rather you would done is just ask me what you wanted to know, and I tell you, and then I get up and go because I just don't, you know.
Well, all right.
I'm just
Ask
not
him
that.
what year he came here.
All right. What year did you come here?
Well, we came to the, well, after we married, we came here in the fall of 1939. And, of course, both of us had been here before, you know, just on short, more or less, for short periods of time, because we'd come out here to work, you know. And,
Did you have relatives in this area?
well, I had an uncle that lived in Lubbock County, up near Shallowwater, but anyway, I never actually went to their place to work. See, when I first came out here, personally, I wound up actually over in Sundown, about a mile west of, just about a mile. There was a farm just practically due west of about what at that time was the center of Sundown. And it was the farm was owned by, I think the old fellow that owned the farm was lived in Washington, D.C., I think, at that time, if I remember correctly. In other words, he was one of these landowners that just didn't live in the area, and he had two families, you know, young families lived on that farm and were, you know, doing the crops and whatever, and he would come in the fall and sort of rush everything up to get the crop harvested as soon as possible. And I don't even remember any names because I remember they were two separate families, and so I just came with a bunch of, when I say a bunch, they were, I think, possibly about 5 or 6 guys came out here in a truck, and we stopped in a little field, and we didn't find what we liked. And so one of the guys happened to meet somebody from this farm out there, and they were looking for help, you know, to harvest the cotton, and so we went over there, and it was just about what we had in mind. you know, I mean, we were just, say, I was about 15 years old at that time. And so, and there was another kid that probably, maybe, he might not have been over 14 years old. He was, but he and I were kind of teamed up together. And so then there were a couple of older guys.
How did you gather the crop?
Oh, we were just pulling cotton by
In a
hand,
sack.
because at that time, there weren't any mechanical type of cotton harvesting machines in this area. They possibly, I don't know when they got those cotton picking, you know, the spindle type pickers. Now, they had them in California and, you know, in some areas, but this area never used them very much. They did it one time or other later, but they weren't all that successful with the types of cotton they grow in this area. See, we were trying to get into more of a storm-proof type of cotton where it wouldn't just blow away when the sandstorm came.
And it did blow, didn't it?
So the stripper cotton was the best machine. See, if you could get a type of cotton, which they did eventually, they called it maca stormproof, and it was more or less just a freak of nature, I guess. It started that because this, see, I think this Maca, Charles Maca, that lives out of Levelland, I heard, they live in Levelland. He's an auctioneer, and I think it was possibly his family or some of his relatives that might have been his daddy, I have no idea. But anyway, they just went out after a storm and into the field, and all the crop was on the ground except he noticed some stalks that were still hanging on. So then from what he salvaged from that little bit that was left from that storm, he developed this new breed of cotton. They called it Maca Stormproof. That was in the possibly the early 40s. And you know, they were just seed from them. That's all they were at that time. But anyway, since that time, they've used this Maca strain of cotton to improve the storm resistance in all the breeds of cotton probably that they even grow today. So, but anyway, at that point in time that I was at sundown, well, it was just big old white fluffy balls, and if your dog happened to chase a rabbit across the field, he might knock out a half a bale of cotton on the ground before he caught the rabbits, because they would just fly everywhere. It was so loosely attached to the bird, you know. And so that was, you know, the history back as far as I know on cotton. I know we raised that type where we came from down in Collin County. It would do the same thing. You just had to hurry, try to get it harvested before it would fall out. And then maybe if it rained a lot, it'd damage it real bad.
Well, do you remember any, was there any oil in that area at that time?
Not at that time. No, this was about 1935. I don't know when that oil deal started. I was back again later after the oil. But at that point in time, there weren't much of anything going on around Sunday. In other words, this farm was just a farm just sort of cut out of the pasture, so to speak. It was just rangeland all around it, but if I remember, it might have been a half section, or I don't remember how much. Of course, coming from East Texas or North Texas with those little 50-acre farms, it looks like a big farm to me. But anyway, we stayed that fall and harvested or pulled cotton for that person, and he paid us 35 cents a hundred, which, you know, that wasn't a big lot of salary, but it was. We made more money, I guess, this kid and me. I could only remember his name. I remember that his mother was a widow, and he was a very nice kid. And
do you remember what cotton was selling for a pound? Do you remember what it was selling for a
at that point in time, it was very little. But see, cotton has been up and down the market. See, when before I began to know what farming was about. See, after World War I, well, farmers had grown a lot of cotton and it had got up to around 50 cents a pound. And a lot of them wouldn't sell because of the fact that they felt like, you know, due to the inflation from the effects of World War I, well, you know, they just kept thinking it was going on. That's the big problem with farmers. If they get a break, such as a big crop one year, or get a lucky break and get a good price for it, well, they have this idea possibly that just may go on forever, but most time it don't. So a lot of people harvested, you know, picked their cotton by hand, and gin the cotton, brought it home, and just dumped it out to hold it so that, you know, they thought that cotton would go to $1 a pound. And the majority of them sold it, some even as low as maybe a nickel or a dime a pound. Because, see, the depression things kind of started inching in, and into the war was over, and I'm sure the government was using a lot of the cotton, you know, and they weren't that much produced at that time due to the fact, you know, they had to hand harvest and all that, and the little gins were so inadequate, so to speak, compared to what they do now. So therefore it, in other words, it just sort of was a big jolt, and that kind of started farmers on, you know, holding cotton for a better price. Even some of them never forget it, you know, and I still think about it. But anyway.
Now, when did you meet Nadine?
Well, we went to school, or they moved from Alabama down to this area there where we were in Collin County. And so her and her sister and brother, they started school there, same school, and that's where I met her.
Now, Collin County, what's
Well,
the county
McKinney's
seat?
the county seat.
McKinney is.
McKinney's.
Northeast Dallas, you know.
Okay.
Sort of, now it's practically in Dallas, so at that time, it seemed like quite a ways from McKinney, Dallas. Like Plano and McKinney and all those towns now are just kind of like, you know, Wolford and Shallowwater are below us.
And back then, you run off and got married. You didn't tell your folks you was gonna get married.
Well, not everybody did that, it's just poor people. I guess you might categorize it that way, but we did have a little problem.
Well, we wasn't old enough to get married was one thing.
How old were you?
I was 17. I was barely 17. He's 18.
Well, the deal was, see, we were planning to get married out here. See, she was out here with her dad and brother.
Brother? Yeah.
And but that particular year, which was in 1937, I was working up there with my uncle in Shallowwater. So we decided we'd get married then just before we were going back to, you know, down to Collin County to home. And so anyway, my cousin, which was about my age, we went and got our license, and he vouched for the fact that I was old enough, which I weren't. So see, our beginning was kind of based on fraud to start lying about the ages and all that stuff, you know, but back at that time, I never gave it a lot of thought. But anyway, then I see her, somebody that knew that her dad saw this in the paper, you know, what they did then like they do now. They
Marriage license come out.
read the license in the paper, and so her dad, just for meanness, I guess, I don't really, you know, but he just loaded everybody up and went home, you know, and so I didn't have, you know, no telephones. I didn't know it. So anyway, I just went ahead and made preparations for a Saturday night wedding down here in Nevada. And my cousin and me, we came down and we brought his girlfriend along. They were kind of going to be witnesses, plus her cousin who lived in Brownfield, Ruby Moorhead, you know, they were working for her family and they were living there on that place and so. But anyway, we got down there and Rita came out and told us, said, well, Dave heard about you getting that marriage license and they left this morning and went back. And there I was sitting there, you know, prepared to be going to be a groom, so to speak. And there wasn't no bride around. And what was kind of funny, we were going to get married and we were going back up to my uncle's and, well, actually I was staying with one of my cousins, but I was working kind of with the family there. So then this cousin was going to take us home, back down there after that. So anyway,
So you went with your dad?
So she went back home.
Oh.
She went back home.
So what did you do?
Just like, well, I went back.
He came the next day or two, and we went and got married.
And them kids, those kids that lived there, this cousin, he had a couple of boys. And so the next morning, I just come home at night and went to bed. And next morning they come peeping around, they was looking for the brides. There weren't one. So anyway, it was sort of, well, anyway, but we, in a day or so, we went back down there. This cousin took me. I didn't have a vehicle anyway. So then about, I guess, a week later, well then, one of our mutual friends and his girlfriend went with us over to a little small place, and an old Baptist minister, he was real elderly person, probably not as old as we are now, but we thought he was
old then. So when you're 17 and 18.
But anyway, that's how we got married, and it was sort of, like I said, it was sort of a scary deal. I mean, but we didn't really think about it at the time. Looking back, well, that was...
He probably had about $10 in his pocket, and that's probably the money we had between us when we got
Where
married.
did you plan to live after you got married?
We lived in the house with his mother for a year, or nearly a year, and then she had a little, we called it a car shed out to one side, and he made a little room out of that. And we set up housekeeping in that. And then that's whenever we moved out here that next fall. And Frances was born while we was living there with her, in her yard, and so we moved out here, and our first house was just a shack. You know what a shack looks like? One roof one way and 2 rooms, and of course Frances was in diapers, and
you're not talking about disposable diapers either, are you?
No,
No.
I rubbed them on the rub board. I didn't have a washer, and it come up a bad sandstorm one day, and I just hung the diapers on the line, and I didn't know how this country worked. And the next thing I knew, them diapers was just as red as they could be with sand. And then went on, in about 4 years, we had another little girl, which was Helen. And we still lived in that,
We'd moved to another house.
We'd moved to another house.
But still worked for the same people.
But it come an awful sandstorm, and I mean then, you didn't sweep the sand out, you didn't dust it out, you shoveled it out. And I had to put a wet cup towel over her bassinet to keep her breathing. The sand, dust was so bad in the house. And, it was horrible.
Well, really though, you didn't really know how horrible it was, because a lot of the farm people lived in some very, very bad.
The best I remember, there wasn't hardly a brick home in this country, and nobody had a real tight house.
Very few. But anyway, if you were a farm worker, well, of course, you were more or less going to have to live whatever was available, and so like we were.
He was drawing $1 a day, wasn't it?
Well, that's about what it amounted to, less possibly. But in other words, there weren't any inflation going on at that point in time.
So $1 was worth $1.
Yeah, well, yeah, but it weren't worth what a lot of people keep saying that. You know, when
Really?
you go to hear people talk about the good old days, well, they just weren't that good. You know, you can just do so much with $1 regardless of how the
Well,
economy
you
is.
could buy a pretty good bill of groceries for $5.
What was bread? What did bread cost, you think?
Well,
We
loaf
didn't
bread
buy it.
would be
You made it?
very seldom that we would buy, you know, a loaf of bread. In fact, Benny, see it, actually, I can even remember first time I ever saw a loaf of bread that was already sliced, you know. You just buy an old, you know, just an unsliced loaf of bread for maybe maybe a nickel.
A small can of condensed milk was a nickel, I believe. And we could buy a pretty good bill of groceries for $5, and would you believe, back then, we built up a little bank account. But the young people now couldn't, because
Well-
they'd have to have, we had linoleums on our floors, and I'd buy these big old round cans of shoe polish, just neutral shoe polish, and got down on my hands and knees and waxed them linoleums. And then we'd take the oil he drained out of the tractor and go around the edge of the linoleum on the floor. That'd keep down the sand, dust, with a rag. And it was,
They do.
one place we lived over east of me, a big old house, it's still over there, but it's been rebuilt. It had upstairs, and the living room was big enough you could put 2 9 or 12 linoleums on it, and then still had stuff around the wood around the edge to oil, you know. And I felt like we didn't have electricity there, but I felt like I was up in high cotton.
Well, see, this was one of the old homestead kind of folks that had moved in the early 1900s. At this place where we lived,
Yeah, they
that
was
the
mentioned
old,
in this
what they call
book.
Walker
Was their name.
home place, and they raised their families, and they were categorized as, you know, I guess the pioneer or the early settlers, you know. And of course, we were associated with the Bells, Molly and Noe Bell. See, they were old homesteaders. So they came out and homesteaded this land. That they got, I don't know, 3 or maybe 3 sections is what they could file on. So they were quite a few. We got to know that was one of the good things of moving here when we did, was getting to meet so many of those old timers before they went on, you know, and passed away. Because we got to know quite a few of them, and it was always, you know, pleasant and interesting. And cause see, they were the people that were there when it started, more or less, you know.
You said you didn't have electricity. When did you get electricity?
Well, we got we didn't.
After we moved to Ropes, wasn't it? We lived right in the edge of Ropes.
We got electricity before we moved to Ropes. In other words, what the deal was, they had these little deals that had a little windmill-looking thing. It had a prop on it, and it had a little generator on it. And I think I bought one for her brother, Eels, her oldest brother. He had lived out in the country, and he'd bought one of them from somebody. And so I bought it. He moved to Ropesville, and so he didn't need it, so I bought it from him. And we had about 2 old batteries in this wind charger, and we had one bulb in my living room, I think, and one in the kitchen. And then we had a real radio. So that was the 3 things that wind charger, and that was in about, well, that was after, you know, World War II started. But there still was very, very little electricity.
Did you have phones?
No.
We didn't have phones.
Very few people had phones. Rural phones, see, that was what the problem was. You couldn't get any of the major companies to put a phone or even electricity out in the rural areas because it was too expensive for the more people than it would serve, you know.
They didn't even have phones in these little towns like Ropes and Meta then. My brother was killed in a plane crash in Savannah, Georgia in 1949. And I know we'd have to go up to the drugstore at Meta to call out there, and they'd call the drugstore when they was wanting us. See, as they didn't recover the bodies of that plane crash for about 3 weeks. It was, it crashed at Savannah, Georgia, and it was on I guess where the tide would come in and cover the wreckage, and they couldn't get them out.
Well, so Meta was bigger than Rhodes?
Well, I don't know, actually.
I don't know. There's both pretty big towns then. There was 3 grocery stores in Ropes, and there's three or 4 in Meta then. And they had a hotel in each town. There's a hotel in each one of them, and they had what they called a cream station at Ropes, where you could sell your cream when you milk the cow and let it rise. And let's see, Ropes had a theater, and Meta just had these old Harley Saddler shows come through the country.
Well, what's a Harley Saddler show?
Well, it's more or less vaudeville, where they just come and perform, on
Where would they
stage.
perform?
Well, I don't really know. I don't think I ever went to one. Harley Saddler, though, was a very prominent name in entertainment.
They just come set up a tent, and it was more or less a tent
they
show.
just have like a tent
In
show.
fact, James Pierce told me Sunday before last that he carried his kids to post a Harley Saddler show that night. They'd never heard of it.
See, I think that, I don't know, it's gotta be like a second or third generation deal now, or maybe not, could not even be the original family got it, but because Harley Saddler was an early day, just sort of a migrant entertainer.
And the Ropes Theater set on the highway here, 6282, right about where Jerry Henson has got that piece of land there that he always has something for sale between Buddy Beaver's, his old restaurant and that other business up there. Well, that theater sat there facing the
No,
highway.
was it a Wallace theater?
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
Wallace
it's a Wallace
Theater.
Theater. Well, I
And my
don't-
brother operated the
they
theater.
called it something, I don't know if they called it Wallace or not. But, they still a Rose or Wallace building over there, I guess you've noticed on the corner.
It was still functioning when I moved in '73. I still had shows there.
And the Rose was named after Wallace's wife.
And so that, the one on the corner, right in the main, across from the courthouse and whatever, on the, I guess you would categorize it on the northwest corner across the street is, I believe that was Wallace, and then the Rose maybe was down off on the side there, I think, on the west side of that street. But anyway, it started in Rose, and of course Miss Blankenship. She was actually the person that made it work. She would go get the film, and she said she'd have to just kind of push Wallace on to make him do it, because he didn't really think it was going to work anyway. And so they eventually wound up with a multi-million-dollar business service.
She seemed like quite a character as I read that book.
She was.
Well, everybody.
She was an old cowboy.
These grandkids, they say if it hadn't been for Grandma, they'd all probably been out here still hoeing or doing manual labor for somebody. Because, their old granddad, he just wasn't much about, he just didn't want to get out and do a whole bunch. He was an old cowboy. He'd rather just wait till fall and brand and sell a few cows. That was a whole lot easier than just being able to go all the time.
Well, there was a lot of people around Ropes that after we moved, of course, we lived on their place, there was a house that, when you go down by the post office, it looked like you're going to run into that house.
Right.
That's where we lived. And there was so many people that would run her down for being so tight and stingy and everything. But I had a lot of respect for her because, she'd come to the house, maybe she'd have a hose on of one kind, and you know, they wasn't wasn't mates. And if if I had, then we cooked breakfast. And I'd usually have biscuits or bacon or something left, and I had it sitting on the cook stove. She'd come by on her way to Seagraves, and she'd say, "What are you going to do with these biscuits?"